The saddest thing about the latest example of people whipping up Jew haters here is that our arts bureaucrats are actually funding two of the people doing it. Matt Chun, who does watercolours for children's books, and feminist Clementine Ford, angry feminists, have helped to circulate on social media the names of 600 Jews they claim are secretly trying to silence critics of Israel. Now, already some of those Jews have been threatened, moved house for fear. That's already sick enough. Worst is that our arts bureaucracies have given both Chun and Ford tens of thousands of dollars of your money to keep them in business. They're funding enemies of our civilization with little talent and much hate. Now, Chun, for instance, also makes money by selling pictures of a burning police car. He claims so-called Zionists is outing are parasitic upon progressive spaces and says Zionists are thoroughly racist and thoroughly anti-Indigenous. On October 7, the day that Hamas terrorists started this war with Israel by slaughtering 1,200 Jews, raping women, kidnapping 250-odd people, Chun tweeted this apparent defence: "Power to the freedom fighters. Death to the occupation. Resistance by any means necessary." What does any means necessary mean? But he doesn't just hate Israel. On the taxpayer-funded liminal site, he has claimed white supremacy remains at the core of the Australian state. He's also tweeted that the Albanese government is a violent colonial regime, that Liberal voters are racist dogs, and the US the greatest threat to peace. It's amazing. Yet Creative Australia, our top funding body, last year gave Chun $42,000. Victoria State Library made him its Children's Literature Fellow. Create New South Wales gave him a share of $187,000, a government grant there. And the state funded for a Centre for Contemporary Asian Art named him its Emerging Writer. Writers Victoria last year even gave Chun money to do a children's book about the supposed enslavement of Pacific Islanders in colonial Australia. I mean, seriously, what are our arts bureaucrats funding with our money? And when will the arts ministers in this country say stop? Joining me is the panel, Liberal MP Garth Hamilton and Stephen Chavura, author and senior lecturer in history at Campion College. You know, Steve, we always get these arguments, don't we? You know, well, you can't interfere with freedom of speech and all, and particularly the arts. You can't second guess the artists and make. But seriously, why should I pay artists like this? Let them earn their own crust and see how far they get then with this hate.
Well, you shouldn't pay, and you certainly shouldn't pay an artist who's borderline calling for violence with that tweet, you know, resistance by any means necessary. That is almost an explicit call for violence. And to tweet such sickening sentiments immediately after that attack on Israel, it just shows that there is simply no moral compass in this particular case. And here's the ironic thing, though. I mean, these artists often sort of fancy themselves very brave and social justice warriors. And so naturally, their object of criticism is countries like Australia and the US and Britain that are free, that are tolerant, that take in, over time, millions of immigrants who wind up living very well here, as opposed to countries like China, which imprisons hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people merely for speaking out against the regime, or countries like Saudi Arabia, even Palestinian territories which have no respect for liberal democratic rights that they themselves claim to support. But of course, all the while, these so-called bold artists are happy to hold their nose and take filthy colonial money, which of course they should not be getting by their own principles, because that money is apparently tainted.
Irony of ironies, Matt Chun is actually given money by the Jewish-funded Maya Foundation, Jewish-run, and part of a program in the name of a Jewish author. He took that money, all right. But Garth Hamilton, is there a better way of funding?
Well, I think there's certainly a better question we should be asking before distributing that funding, and are these artists or are they activists? I think you can differentiate quite clearly between the two. And some of the examples that you've given, Andrew, are clearly examples of people profiting from the extreme misery of very, very vulnerable people. So, look, I don't think that society has great tolerance for this. And you're right to raise it. This isn't a question of freedom of speech. This isn't a question of artistic licence and allowing people to express themselves. This is about community standards, and I think government does have a role in that. We shouldn't just be handing out money willy-nilly because it's being applied for. I think we can ask, what is the purpose of this and does it benefit our society?
Does it benefit our society? We should have to have ministers that are prepared to make the ruling on that, but increasingly they're divesting their responsibility to unaccountable arts bodies who seem to be made of same thinkers. I mean, talk about rugged individuals, they all seem to think alike, which is weird. But can I just say with you, Garth, because you're upset that the NAB Bank is closing dozens of branches because customers are switching to online. Why does this upset you? I mean, isn't that market forces?
Look, there's a lot about the NAB that upsets me. This was a bank that made a lot of noise during the Voice campaign about how important it was to listen to regional voices, except when it comes to things that they can control. So they're quite happy to close down regional branches. I don't know how they're going to be listening to regional voices if they're closing down those branches. It goes further, the hypocrisy. The Pittsworth branch, which is in my electorate and has got me most excited about this, there's a sign on the wall that says, "We think locally." Look, I can't see a greater case of hypocrisy. This is just pure marketing by the NAB. They don't think locally. They don't think about Pittsworth. This is a town surrounded by great black soil. It's a wonderful regional community. If you can't run a bank there, in a town like that, you can't run one anywhere outside of a city. So I think NAB, for a start, needs to be honest that they have no intention of running regional banks. But look, beyond this, Andrew, I think there's a bigger question. And I think it's time for us to have this conversation. The big four banks exist within a policy framework that the Australian government, successive Australian governments, have created. And if they are unable to sustain branches in places like Pittsworth, maybe it's time we looked at different policy settings that helped the customer-owned banks, the smaller banks, provide more competition.
Yeah.
I'll be pushing for that. I think this time the big four dominating has to come to an end.
But Stephen, you know, the market forces are the market forces. They can't make it work if it's cheaper. You know, they don't want to inconvenience other customers. Maybe that's the price they pay, the lack of local community.
Yeah, but that's a very, very heavy price. I mean, literally not being able to get to a bank in your community. And I tend to agree that this is actually a tremendous market opportunity for smaller banks to come in. And so I would actually suggest that smaller banks should really take advantage of this, not just as something that's good for the community, but as a genuine way of getting into that market.